Nasal breathing in ultra endurance. Today we are going to unpack why I'm a little bit passionate about nasal breathing in ultra endurance sports, whether that's running ultra marathons, whether that's marathons, half marathons, or even I'd probably define endurance as anything above 5Ks, above 10 kilometers, because those distances, although they don't seem far, it is causing a sustained level of stress on our system, and how we train our body directly impacts our ability to succeed in going that extra distance. In this module, I'm going to unpack a scientific paper that will show you some interesting insights around exercise exertion, around moisture retention, around heat loss, and hopefully communicate what I've then understood after doing ultra endurance sports with only nasal breathing, some scientific backing behind it, because on my journey I wanted to experiment and understand, could I nasal breathe during a 50k ultra and a 100k ultra, and I did those things, and throughout that journey I was like, is this a thing or is this just me? And it turns out there's actually quite a bit of scientific literature now starting to back up this, the physiological reasons why there are benefits for endurance sports. And just keep note here, we're talking about endurance. We're not talking about super speedy sprinting. We're not talking about other specific adaptations, although I have experimented a lot with this breathing technique across a range of different running modalities as well. But those will come elsewhere in due course, so let's dive in and see what's going on. Righto, nasal breathing in ultra endurance. Here's what we are going to cover. Heat regulation. How the nose maintains heat regulation in the body. As you know by now, nose designed to warm, humidify, and filter air that enters and leaves our body. Moisture loss. How the nose maintains significantly more water retention. Again, it's a specific organ designed for the control of moisture in and out of our body. Think of it like a big chamber that has invisible timing mechanisms that supports the temperature in and the temperature out, and it's complex mixing equations or algorithms somewhere going on up there and connecting in here to unlock that moisture or retain or give it back. Man, our bodies are amazing. Dead space. How increasing intra-abdominal pressure makes our lungs more efficient. We'll explore how more pressure equals more oxygen. Respiratory rate. Breathe less, go further, go longer. Contrary to belief, there's a lot of data out there that shows that by breathing less, we can actually go further, faster, and for longer. YouTube and Instagram, you can find Skeletal Freedom, where you can follow for exclusive content at Skeletal Freedom. Share the course. Let's start a revolution and change runners' lives together. Train your team. Free online trainings for sports teams. Warning, this is the most important video in the entire course. Watch the entire video, be present, and don't fast forward. Pro tip, watch on 2x speed, but not the breathing exercises. Heat regulation and moisture loss. Surface area. The surface area of your lungs is 60 to 100 square meters. The surface area of our skin is roughly equal to 2 square meters. So, if we were to carve off our skin that we see and can touch on the outside of our body, or our naked bodies in this context, and we were to stretch it out in a big square or like a big hide, like an animal hide, if we were to measure all of that, it would be about 2 square meters. And so when we do exercise and increase our intensity, essentially we sweat often through our skin. We see that moisture on our clothing, it might be dripping off our head. something so fascinating that I became alluded to is they estimate that the average person's lungs has a surface area of anywhere from 60 to 100 square meters. So that means inside our lungs, all of the little sac-like alveoli that you might have heard of, think of them like broccolis, right? If you were to measure all of the ins and outs and the curvy bits of those broccolis in here that exchange air, and if we stretch that out, that would be anywhere from 60 to 100 square meters. And to visually think about that, that's the same as the size of a tennis court. So next time you can visualize Serena Williams or Roger Federer playing tennis, think, okay, cool. That's the same surface area of my lungs. So often our experience of sweat and moisture loss is through our skin, yet 30 times more interaction with the air that we move through in connection to moisture and heat is our lungs. Take note of that. Heat management. Studies show a 12% higher inhale temperature via the mouth. So what they've measured is that when someone breathes in through their mouth, that outside air temperature is 12% higher in the lung system than if I was to breathe in through my nose. And so what that means is if it's a really hot day, or our bodies are heating up, or the air's really dry out there, that temperature differential is 12% higher through our mouths than in through our nose. Alright, nose is designed to regulate temperature. Heat loss. Studies have shown a 6% lower exhale temperature via our noses than our mouths. So just as it's important to maintain lower temperature air entering our bodies, if for instance it's a cold day, we also need to maintain temperature in our bodies. And so they've also measured this and they've found that nasal breathing maintains a 6% higher body temperature than mouth breathing. So if we're running and it's raining and I'm getting cold, 6% temperature efficiency essentially, right? Say you might be snowboarding on the mountains. You're letting out all of that hot air, right? So shifting to nasal breathing helps maintain temperature in our body and keep our body at homeostasis so it's efficiently exchanging air and creating energy in our cells. Dehydration. 42% less expired water when breathing nasal versus mouth. Expired water. Right? So as you know, we get hot, we run, we get thirsty. Well, they've found that the nose holds on to 42% more moisture in our system than the mouth. So again, warms, humidifies, filters air, panting like a dog in and out the mouth, just lets all that moisture go, right? And so if we are running, again, distances over 5Ks, that's probably usually about 30 minutes. 10Ks, we're looking at an hour. 20Ks, 2 hours, so on. The more water we need, or the more times we might need to stop to take on board water. And staying hydrated is really important for cellular function and stopping degradation of cells in our body, but then also other pseudo things like cramps, like the stitch. All of these things are just parts in our body that are telling us, hey, I need something to operate here and I can't get energy to those cells. And so if there's not enough moisture, we might not be able to digest the carbohydrates or the salts to get the right things to our cells to help us go further. And so when we breathe through our nose, the amount of water we expire is very significantly lower than if we breathe through our mouths. So especially when going ultra endurance, this is one of the main benefits that I think is just astronomical for ultra runners, especially when we're carrying fluid on ourselves, and that's extra weight that we need to carry between aid stations, and really it's a little bit of a no-brainer. Dead space, let's talk about that. Benefits of diaphragmatic breathing. So when we breathe with our diaphragm fully engaged, and I'm sure you've gone through the first modules which teach you how to properly engage that diaphragm, our breathing is going away from shallow fast breathing, right? So when we're not diaphragmatic breathing, this is what our lungs look like, right? So the pressure of gravity is keeping all the blood at the bottom, all the air at the top. And when we're not engaging that lower section of our ribs, when we're not engaging that diaphragm, the pressure in our lungs looks like this. And we need to remember that to get the air in, to get carbon dioxide and oxygen exchanged with our cells, we need to get it into the bloodstream. If they're separated like this, it's really hard for the body to do that. Again, it's an energy trade-off equation. This is hard work for the body. Slow, deep breathing is the goal. And this is what it looks like when we have fully engaged diaphragmatic breathing. So by engaging that diaphragm, fully engaging those lungs, we can work against gravity, we can spread out the pressure in the lungs, and therefore increase the exchange capacity as we're running. Increased resistance, 50% higher versus mouth breathing increases intra-abdominal pressure. So when we nasal breathe, these little holes are smaller in our mouth, right? And so increasing the resistance to breathe through our nose increases what we call the intra-abdominal pressure within our lungs, which helps spread out that pressure, and by maintaining that, we are more efficiently able to exchange gas in our lungs. Increased oxygen uptake. Arterial pressure of oxygen in nasal breathers is 10% higher. So we've increased the pressure required to breathe by breathing through our nose. What this means is arterial pressure, right? An artery, or you think of like an artery of a tree, might be the limbs of a tree, the bits on the outside, right? The outside branches. Our hands is like our far arterial system. Our feet and toes are also our arterial system, right? And so anything outside of that lung heart region was our arterial network. And by increasing the intra-abdominal pressure, it's been shown that it increases the pressure of oxygen in our bloodstream and in our bodies by 10% at the extremities. What this means is that our bodies require less energy to exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen at those extremities to keep us engaged and moving. It takes less effort for the heart to pump blood out there. And so it's almost like the opposite of altitude training. So massive, massive benefit. If you want a 10% boost in something, there you go. Increased blood flow. Nitric oxide redistributes blood throughout the lungs, increasing blood flow by as much as 24% in the upper regions. When we breathe through our nose, it takes the nasal nitric oxide that's produced by the nasal cavities and takes it down into our lungs. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator. Vascular, blood system, dilator, dilation makes things bigger and more expansive. So essentially when we nasal breathe, it redistributes the blood more effectively in our lungs and increases that flow by as much as 24%. As you know, to go ultra or to endure further, we need to find efficiency gains, and increasing the blood flow by as much as 24% in our upper sections of our lungs from that nitric oxide inhalation through our nose is huge. Respiratory rate. This is a journal paper that you can look up on the internet if you search effective nasal versus oral breathing on VO2 max and physiological economy in recreational runners following an extended period spent using nasally restricted breathing. Now, this was published in 2018. Okay, so this is publicly available, and just to, it's always, if you are like familiarizing yourself with sports literature, scientific literature, abstracts are always a great place to start, but they often include all sorts of crazy little numbers and acronyms and yada yada yada. So let's unpack some of those. Let's just skip to the conclusion and then we'll unpack some of the content above it. Conclusion. This study supports the ability of recreational runners to utilize a nasally restricted breathing pattern at all levels of running intensity without loss in VO2 max or GXTTE, I'll explain that later, and with superior PE and VEVO2 following an extended training period using this practice. Okay. So what it essentially says is this study supports the ability for recreational runners to utilize a nasally restricted breathing pattern at all levels without loss. Okay, and so why I think this is really interesting for ultra endurance athletes is that a lot of ultra endurance, the aim is to go longer, not more intensely, or maintain intensity over a very long period of time. But often that intensity overall is much lower. So it's almost like a recreational athlete's normal speed or normal exercise just over a really long time. And so what this essentially to me shows is an interesting insight into ultra endurance and why nasal breathing's, potentially very advantageous in your training, is that there are very limited downsides to this scientifically. And so this here is the fancy table of their results out of this paper. And again, you can find this online. What does this mean? P-values, okay? So to look this up, this is always confusing. They say p-values. You can see here p-values, p equals 0.002. What does that mean? What's important, right? So a little asterisk here, significant at 0.05. So that means that there's a significant correlation that this is a very confident result. And so if this number gets smaller than this, then they have high certainty in the data. So this result, nasal versus oral, highly certain that they are confident from the data that this is a correlation. Okay? As you can see, the one below it, there must be a large range of variability in the data, and so at 0.4 they're not confident that this is a differential effect between these two processes. Okay? And then this number here, effect size, moderate or large. Okay, so they say that effects over 0.7 are moderate, so it's a moderate gain. And anything sort of over 0.9 is a very large gain compared to the comparator. So what this says is that they are statistically confident in the result if this is 0.05 or below, right? So 0.001 is less than 0.5, 0.0001 is very, very, very confident, and so forth, marked by the asterisks. And then how big the effect is: moderately large, somewhat large, somewhat large, 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 moderate. Okay, so let's take an example. Essentially, VO2 here measured in litres per minute, nasal condition 2.64 plus or minus 0.27, 2.76 plus or minus 0.25, shown to be statistically significant difference between the two, right? So it's accurate, and there's a moderate difference between oral to nasal. So what this shows is that in litres per minute, the nasal breather only needed to breathe 2.64 litres per minute for this determined exercise regime that they were comparing versus the oral condition of 2.76. So this means that the oral breathers breathed 2.76 litres per minute, whereas the nasal breathers only had to breathe 2.64 litres per minute. And so if that's, say, 0.12 out of 2.64, out of 2.64 times 100, so essentially that is 4.55% less volume of oxygen that the nasal breathers had to use or inhale in this test to achieve the same performance. What's the next one? Respiratory rate in breaths per minute, not beats per minute. In the nasal condition, they breathe 36.45 times per minute. In the oral condition, they breathe 43.28 times per minute. Statistically significant and is a large difference, right? So into this test condition, 36.45, what's that? 43.28 minus 36.45, 6.83 out of 43.28 times 100. That's 15.8. That's 15.8% less breaths per minute the nasal breathers had to take to achieve the same exercise regime. 15%. That's like, if you were to get like a 15% return on your money at the bank, I'd sign up for that. You get very rich very quick. You double your money every 3.5 years. So that's pretty good gains. VE, litres per minute. Very significant. Okay, so this is talking about how many litres per minute ventilation, I think VE is ventilation, it's like ventilation volume essentially. So how many litres per minute did the nasal breathers have to breathe versus the oral breathers? 84.41 litres versus 102 litres. Okay, so let's call it, that's about 16 to 20% less air they had to breathe in and out of their body. Huge gains, absolutely huge. And this is a double, this is extra large. Look at that, it's a 2x, massive, right? PET, CO2, I believe this measurement here is the perceived, no that's not, I've highlighted it wrong, that's that one, but this one here, I've actually highlighted that wrong. But as you can see, just looking at the numbers, you can look this back up in the paper if you Google it. Essentially, this is higher. This is the pressure of CO2, I believe, in millimeters per, I feel like HG's surface air level pressure. So again, statistically significantly higher pressure of CO2, right? So this is so a higher pressure of CO2 in the nasal breathers versus the oral breathers. Coming back to our intra-abdominal pressure and coming back to understanding the Bohr effect, oxygen in our cells is released by a higher tolerance to carbon dioxide. So this says that the nasal breathers displayed a higher level of CO2 tolerance in their bloodstream than the oral breathers by almost 10%, right? And that it is statistically significant and it's a large difference. So 10% higher carbon dioxide pressure in the bloodstream is essentially coming back to our 10% higher partial pressure of oxygen. Essentially, it enables our body to release more oxygen out of that cell because there is more carbon dioxide available to do so. So these are just some examples from this one paper of benefits they've found in runners. Conclusion, this study supports the ability of recreational runners to utilize a nasally restricted breathing pattern at all levels of running intensity without loss in VO2 max or GXT-TE and with superior PE and VE VO2 following an extended period using this practice. GXTTE, time to exhaustion in graded exercise protocol. So this test was a graded intensity test, and this was all measured on time to exhaustion, okay? VO2, so as we saw in the data, ventilation was reduced by 22%, nasal versus mouth, okay? That's massive. 22% less air required to breathe whilst on your next run. That means 1/5. So that's like the equivalent of saying, if I was to, no, it's 1/5 or 2/10. So it's like getting a free 10 minutes on your run. That's massive. Breaths required, 16% reduction in respiration, breaths per minute versus the mouth. Okay, you can breathe less and maintain the same VO2 max and maintain the same graded intensity of exercise as someone breathing out their mouth, but you've got 16% less volume required. So that's huge. That's huge. VO2 max, no loss, they found. Superior PE, physiological economy. So PE is measured on a scale, and essentially once all these runners, nasal and oral, did this test, it's a subjective measure, but it's on a graded scale. They would survey them each time, and the nasal breathers denoted a superior physiological economy throughout the test. And just remember, there's a scientific paper. The nasal breathers and the mouth breathers didn't know what the test was about or what they were determining at the outset of this paper. That is what scientific literature is good at. And so if they were a nasal breather, they wouldn't have been like, oh, I feel better because I know this is a test comparing these things. They would not have known across the board. And so that if you were to essentially repeat this test with a nasal breather and a mouth breather, you would expect similar results. Reduced CO2 and O2 requirement. Breathing less, more efficient, less carbon dioxide, less oxygen requirement. Go further, faster, with less. In summary, stress management. Lower temperature, less water loss equals more efficient. Okay? Hot things boil. We can't sit in the sauna for too long. And if we're in the sauna for too long and we don't have enough water, it's not going to be a good time, right? And so when we start to do really hard things, like going for a run or pushing it all the way to going for ultra, stress management is fundamental. So I hope some of these insights can inform some experiments that you want to run in your training. Nasal breathing, less breaths per minute, less volume of air required, no drop in VO2 max. When we're going ultra, we're not pushing VO2 max often, but in our training, we often need to. And so we need to create the most efficient engine on the planet to help us go further. This enables us to do so. Testimonial.to/skeletal freedom. If you are finding this content valuable, please leave a testimonial, and I've got special prizes for those that do. I love seeing the testimonials from your gains and your efficiency in your runs. Feel free to go to testimonial.to/skeletal freedom. Today's quote: give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Abraham Lincoln. This is one of my absolute favorites, and if you're going to run 5Ks, 10Ks, 100Ks, maybe 50, maybe 160Ks, spend the time, like you're doing already, to figure out the best way to sharpen the axe before attempting to chop down the tree. It will level up your training and it will help you achieve your goals massively. I'm fired up. I hope you are ready to go and start experimenting in your training. Cheers.